Murfreesboro and Rutherford County are so rich in their respective histories, with many women who've had integral roles in creating our community's sense of place. The Rutherford Arts Alliance is proud to partner with Murfreesboro City TV to showcase a number of these women as a part of our Leading Ladies of Rutherford County History project. From murals to our community-involved play, A Party of 12 by Mary Donay Johnson, we're proud to honor these diverse women of our past who inspire us as we give them a voice in today's world. Let's find out more about one of these leading ladies.
Lucy Burke Maney was an enslaved woman in the mid-1800s. Once she gained her freedom, she married David Maney, one of the first deacons at First Baptist Church. Her legacy will be tied to so many, in her name, Maney, as their story continues to be discovered today and their connection to one of the most historic homes in Murfreesboro.
Lucy Maney, and I know she's your great-grandmother. So tell me what you know about her, and if you know, even with your grandmother and everything that ties to the family, to the Maney family.
Well, unfortunately, I have no knowledge of my ancestors past Lucy Burke Maney. Her parents are unknown to us, as well as the parents of my great-grandfather, David Maney. But anyway, they were married early on, and as I think I said before, my great-great-grandfather was one of the founding fathers of First Baptist Church. He was a deacon there, and of course she was active in the church as well. We do know that they were both there at the Maney plantation, and her husband David was actually the blacksmith there on the plantation, and we verified that through records from Oakland's mansion, and John Lodell helped us do a lot of the research for that. But we do know very much so that Lucy Burke and David were the parents of Luke and Maney Maney. They had the two children, and of course Luke was my great-grandfather. So when we look at that, we come down to that generation, and he married Ada Sykes Maney, and of course they were my great-grandparents, and of course they lived here in Murfreesboro. The one thing we did find out about David and Lucy Burke Maney was the fact that after slavery, they at one time lived on the corner of Jackson and Highland Avenue, and at that time that was still part of the Maney land that they call that Northfield development. Now we don't know whether they own that property or they rented that property, but we do know that that's where they lived. And from that place they moved to the home place on State Street, which was 312 East State, and that's where my grandmother and my dad were born. And of course now that spot is occupied by the parking lot for Scales and Sons Funeral Home. But that's where they lived, and the family continued to live until 1968. Yeah.
The African American Heritage Society has paired with Oakland Mansion, and I'm sure you've maybe seen it in print where we're going to put that monument there to for those enslaved that was on the Maney plantation, as well as African Americans that do not have headstones. And also, with that being said, I've been to the Oakland Mansion more the last few years than I've ever been in my life, and been around here all the time because I used to take my children there to swim, but I never went into the plantation. I guess you're thinking about a plantation, you know, you weren't that interested in going in to see that. But you have really helped Oakland Mansion to uncover a lot of the history there about the African American Maneys that came off that plantation. And he has got several pictures that you've shared, which we feel like that's good, because before that, the first time I went there, we didn't see the evidence of the African Americans, the parts that they had contributed to that Oakland mansion. So that's what James is trying to do, is bring that to the forefront and let people know what part the Maney, the African American Maney slaves played in that. And I think that's something that need to be, because you know, making those bricks and stuff from the hands, their handprint is all over that plantation and everything. And I admire him for doing that, because it had not been done in the past, and everything. And you're talking about the Maneys. Mr. Reverend Clark shared some pictures with me, and one of them was Matthew Maney. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. He was away from here, and he had a picture of him, and I shared that with James, and James have it on the Oakland Mansion website now, and they brought him back from where he lived somewhere up north when he died, and they put him out there in the stone. He's in the war. They have him. They buried him out there in the Q section of the Stones River National Battlefield, and he was a part of the Maney family. And also, my father's grandmother, Dolly Muse, that family married into the Maneys as well. Her name was Mildred Maney Muse, and I traced her family, and they are also there in the Jackson Forest, somewhere. They were brought up in that area. And she has a brother, and he said he had heard about it, but he didn't know anything about it. So I talked to him about it, but he did not know. And he is a Maney. He's still living there in Nashville. But their family was brought up in that area too. And I think with Audrey Creed had done some research, the untold story of the Maney family. I'm sure you've, James have shared that with you, and you've seen that. And a lot of the Maney families, like you said, like your great-great-grandparents lived in that area, whether they owned the land or not. It was so close, I guess, after as slavery was over with, they still stayed within that area where the Maney owned that property and everything. So, is there anything else you can think of concerning Lucy or your grandparents? How many children did Lucy and David? How many children did they have?
They had two.
They had two.
Luke and Maney, and of course Luke was my great-grandfather. And Maney married but never had any children. So,
and you talk about Luke Maney. I did research on a Luke Murphy, which mother came out of that that family as well. That's how I started doing the research and everything. And he's buried out there in the Evergreen Cemetery. Do you know where Luke and Lucy, do you know where they were buried? Have you found out for sure?
Don't know about David and Lucy Burke, but I do know that Luke Maney, their son, is buried in the National Cemetery.
Okay, so he's
he fought in the Spanish-American War.
Oh, okay.
And because I remember them saying, my great-grandmother never really worked, and that she lived on his pension.
Oh, okay.
After he died, but he was also a blacksmith here in Murfreesboro.
Oh, okay.
So,
do you know of any Maneys? That's what we're really trying to find out. Some of the Maneys that came off of that plantation by name that was buried in that cemetery. You know, we found I think there's a Carrie Maney out there. There may be a couple more that we have found that's actually buried in the Evergreen Cemetery. And we're just trying to document that to some of the names to try to find out who was actually buried there on the grounds. And of course, the Evergreen, a lot of their information burned, their records and stuff, when they said that the headquarters burned back in in the 40s or something like that. So they lost a lot of that information, and we don't know exactly where they are buried. And I know James have read articles hoping somebody will come forth and share some information with us so we would know exactly where. And but Miss Brewer there at the Evergreen Cemetery, the director, she said that they don't disturb a lot of that M section because they know that some of the enslaved was buried there, but they don't know where.
Well, I do know Luke was buried in Stones River National Cemetery, but his wife, Ada, is buried at the Benevolent Cemetery off on Church Street.
I think I've got a list of the Maneys, there are a few Maneys that by that name are buried out there in the Benevolent Cemetery and everything. But we would love to know a little bit more about the Maneys, even names other than the ones that you've shared that came off of that plantation and everything. So,
when we were thinking about that, Dr. James Maney, you know, he had several plantations.
Oh yeah, Mississippi.
So my grandmother always talked about the fact that they were born and reared right here in Murfreesboro, whereas some of those other families, probably from some of his other plantations, moved into this area. Now for her, there was a sense of pride that this was her home, and you know, she had been reared here. But also, and I don't know if you talked to her, I may have said that to you, Elodia Batts is also a descendant of the families that lived there on the Maney plantation. I think her family was Kibble, I believe, and, but they were all there. So we kind of all related in here.
Yeah, and a lot of people, and it's probably more people related even still here to the Maney family that have not done their research because of the fact a lot of time you stayed within that area there, and they just never have done the research to find out how they're tied to that family, whether blood or by just a slave master buying the families and rearing them there, and they just never done the research. And that's why we're trying to put it out there, trying to get people to really go in and document their family history, because you'll be surprised how people are tied together. And of course, Dr. Maney came in, and I know he married Hardy Murphy's daughter. And when I was researching that information on that Luke Murphy, I found out, learned about as much of Hardy Murphy's family that I know of my own family, and everything. So where they had all this land, and I think that may have been how Dr. Maney's got him, was through Hardy Murphy's daughter, because he married her, and they gave them so much land here in Rutherford County because of that. Even though Hardy never lived here, he lived. When I did the research, he lived in Wilson County, where I think his son or daughter lived there. Say when his wife died there in Rutherford, North Carolina, that when she died, he moved here with her. And then after he died, so he split it up amongst his children, all this land and everything. And I mean, he owned a lot of land here. Maney running all the way down to where the Discovery Center, and of course all of those over there that's named after the Confederate generals that people probably don't think about. You got the Jacksons, you got the Forest, Lee, you know, you got all those streets there. You know, they named them after that, but all that land came through him. And the Murphys also, I don't know, a lot of people don't know, down at where Toots, that's
Broad.
Broad Street. That they have a sign there with that on there. And Grandin, you know, you used to have a Grandin Rice boat, all of that over in that area off of Jones and all that. That was their property. And I think that's where the Murphys' home place was. And they moved, they had a cemetery over there, and they moved those to the Evergreen Cemetery. You see a lot of the Murphys there because they moved those bodies when they built up that big subdivision over there in that area and put them out there. So
the land they own was just massive.
I know.
It's unbelievable in terms of dollar value today, how much, you know, actually they probably be billionaires with all the land that they had previously owned, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And not only them, during my research, and I found out a lot of those landowners here, that's how they got that land, was through the government giving it to them because they fought in that war. And as far as much, even out there in Walter Hill, they just gave them that land. And a lot of them started their plantation through that. And like you said, the Maneys had several, and they was buying and selling slaves just like, you know, they were doing their other property and stuff or whatever. So,
and, you know, and I was thinking, because we really don't know, because at the end of slavery, you know, so many of the enslaved people took the names of the owners that they had worked for. So we're not sure if that was the case with David. What we do know, which to me is always eyebrow raiser, when we looked at the census reports, my great-grandfather, which was Lucy Burke's son, when they reported him, he was listed as mulatto. And so, you know, when you think back on those terms, and it's hard to say that, and it's uncomfortable for people to think about that, but I tell everybody, I say, I look the way I do now because one of my grandmothers was raped at that time, you know? So it's good to know, but then it's also, you know, heart-touching to know that. So that's one of the things that, you know.
And I just got through talking to Ernestine about that, you know, doing my research and everything. My great-grandfather was brought here from Virginia with his slave owner. It was said it was one African-American lady and 3 children, and he was one of them. And I did my DNA. They were Alfords. And I did my DNA and everything, and the Alfords showed up. And of course, they were listed as mulatto, and that means that there's something else other than being African American. They mixed with other nationalities, in which it ended up being white. And I did my DNA, and the white Alfords are showing up in my DNA as my 5th or 8th cousin. So my great-great-grandfather, somebody in his, whether it was the slave owner, the master or not, somebody within his family was his father. And I have made contact with a lady there in South Carolina, and also there's some here in Murfreesboro, but you know, we have not met, and he chose not to meet with me, and everything. But that's the way it was. And everything. So, and like you said, they took their slave master's last name. A lot of it was not by choice. It was the fact that they did that, and 90% of them, when they bought their enslaved, they took their name, and I think that was a way for them to keep track of them there. And I have found out that on some of the plantations, they allowed them to keep the name of whoever they bought them from. They may have, they were able to, they would let them keep that name if they bought them from John Doe, even though the Johns or somebody bought them, they would let them keep that name. But 90% of the time, they had to take whoever that slave master. And then some of them after slavery, they, like you said, they kept that name, and some of them changed that name. And I found some, and one example is down there at the Stones River Battlefield where Mr. Holland lived, and you see his name several different ways where they sort of changed it. And if you do this research, and I've come across that a lot. And I've also come across where I feel like some people are confused because they, so-and-so bought them here, they had that name, then so-and-so bought them here, and they changed that name. So I found out in some of the older records where their last name interchanges. You know, they may have this slave master's name this time, and then when you look in the census, when they start taking census on us in 1870, what they would interchange. You may find them one name in 1870, next name you find them, their last name something else. Because my mom always thought her grandmother was Malone. She always told us that her name was Millie Malone. Of course, that's part of your family too. But when I did the research and found her, she's an Alford. But I'm sure that the Malones and the Alfords are tied together, but her name was actually Alford, and her father's name was Henry Alford.
Well, you know, we also always wondered, by Lucy's last name being Burke, if she had actually been a part of the Maney plantation, or if she had been, you know, from another place and had come there. But again, because we have no records.
That's right.
And I've also done the DNA check, and nothing goes back for us past Luke and Ada Maney. So even anything connected to Lucy and David is lost.
Yeah, and I went to Nashville too, and they said, you know, they just didn't keep good records on us, and they just don't have it.
My grandmother only had the 2 children, my dad and his sister, and her sister only had 1 child.
Yeah.
So it's a very small family in that generation. But then, of course, my dad came along and had 11.
Your dad and my mom was competing, and my mom had 9. I said they were competing with each other. You know, they grew up together, so they were competing, I think, to see who could have the most kids and stuff, you know, whatever. So, but my mom was an only child too on the Butler side. But my dad had a big family. It was 11 of them on the Patterson side, so we have a big family as well, and everything. So, and a lot of times I found out that happened with because of the way the enslavement way it was set up. When slavery was over, and I don't know if you found that out or not during your research, a lot of the older men, they married young women, and I think that was hopefully that they would be able to have a family, being that their family was separated and they didn't have track. But a lot of them married younger women that I have found out during my research. I don't know if you came across that or not with the Maney family or whatever, where once they were, you know, slavery ended, they married young women.
The only other thing, as a family, we've talked about, especially now that the racial climate in our country is in the shape that it's in, and we also talked about this issue about reparations and not being able to go back and, you know, say where that came from. But again, that generational wealth, I think, in my family in particular, that was denied them.
And same here, yeah.
You know, and the fact that he worked there and has nothing to show for it.
I know.
You know, for that whole time. So which meant that, and I've always said this, pretty much every generation of African Americans start out crawling, you know, because there is no generational wealth, literally, to pass on. And your family's been extremely blessed because you guys have had so much land out there that also equates to wealth. But again, because David Maney lived right there on the corner of Jackson and Highland, and once he died, there's no record of any of my family ever living in that place again. So even though I can't prove it through records, I believe that that was a land that he rented from his former owner or whatever, but definitely not passed along.
Yeah, and I think in some of the cases back, even after the after slavery was over with, and even when the African Americans were profiting a little bit, we had the clans and other people that come in and destroy that, and I think they felt like, you know, in some cases they may have had more than they did, and they didn't like that, and they would do some things to that. And these people married into your family. I know that Annie Frazier was a part of the, what we started doing the research for the senior 65 and up, and we call it the Rutherford County, the African American past and present of Rutherford County. She was a part of that. Okay, again, thank you for coming today. I can't think of anything else, but I really appreciate you coming today and sharing this with us. I hope we didn't do too much bird walking and all, but I just love talking about the history, you know, because I feel like it's so important that we do preserve the history, you know, for our generation, because we don't know a lot about it, and those generations to come when we are gone, so they will know from which they came. And I always tell people, I don't want this to be like a stumbling block. I just want it to be awareness, and I want young people to know from which they came from, because a lot of our information are not being taught like it should be in the history books, in the school system and stuff like that. So it's really up to us to document and preserve our history.
One other thing before we end it, when I was doing the genealogical search and all of the DNA, it was interesting to me that my family originally came from Nigeria, and you know, for me that was something, just to know that part of it, because the only history I know is that which occurred here on American soil. So that was good for me.
For more information about our project, Leading Ladies of Rutherford County History, visit our website, leadingladiesrutherford.com. Or if you have a story of someone from the past who inspired you, you can share it on our website. For more information about the Rutherford Arts Alliance and what we're doing to promote arts, culture, and heritage, visit rutherfordartsalliance.org. And thank you for watching.